Let's cut through the fantasy. If you're still losing sleep, replaying every conversation, wondering if they ever loved you, here's the truth. They didn't. And it's time you stop confusing pain with passion. You weren't loved, you were tolerated, used, or admired from a distance. And today, we rip off the emotional band-aid so you can finally heal, rise, and never crawl back to breadcrumbs again. Avoidant individuals don't enter relationships to bond. They enter them to protect themselves. What feels like rejection to you was for them an act of self-preservation. You offered them connection, closeness, and emotional vulnerability, and they ran, not because you weren't good enough, not because you were too much, but because the very thing you were giving them, love, felt dangerous to their nervous system. They've spent their whole lives building walls to feel safe, and when you came along offering intimacy, they saw it as a threat, not a gift. You have to understand this. Your love didn't fail. It was simply given to someone who didn't know what to do with it. The closer you tried to get, the more they pulled away. The more consistently you showed up, the more inconsistent they became. And that wasn't about you. That was about their inner world. A world shaped by fear of emotional dependency, fear of being engulfed, fear of losing their autonomy. They're not evil. They're not heartless, but they are emotionally unavailable, and that's not something your love can fix. They didn't reject you, they rejected the mirror you held up. That mirror reflected all the things they refused to confront. Their fear of closeness, their discomfort with honesty, their lack of emotional maturity. You became a mirror to their wounds, and instead of doing the work, they turned their back. Because doing the work would mean confronting pain they've buried for years, maybe decades. That's terrifying to someone whose whole identity is built around emotional self-protection. Here's what makes it even harder. They may have shown moments of affection, warmth, even passion, and you clung to those moments thinking they were proof that love existed. But those moments were often fleeting, reactive, and shallow. They were survival patterns, not acts of deep emotional intimacy. It's easy to confuse the adrenaline of emotional inconsistency with love. But love isn't adrenaline, it's presence. And they weren't present. They were constantly retreating into themselves. The hard truth? You were never truly in the relationship with them. You were in a relationship with the idea of who they could be if they dropped the armor. But they didn't. And until they choose to face themselves, they never will. You didn't lose someone who loved you. You lost someone who never had the emotional bandwidth to love you in the first place. You weren't in love with who they really were. You were in love with who you believed they could become. That imagined version of them, the one you saw glimpses of on good days, the one who smiled a certain way, said the right thing once in a while, made you feel like maybe, just maybe they were changing. That version lived mostly in your mind. And every time they disappointed you, hurt you, pulled away, you forgave it, not because you were weak, but because you were emotionally invested in their potential, not their pattern. You told yourself they just need time, or they've been through a lot, or worse, if I love them harder, they'll heal. But the truth is, love isn't a project, and a partner is not a patient. You kept showing up, offering more compassion, more patience, more chances, thinking that if you just held on a little longer, they'd finally open up, finally see your worth, finally stop running. But they didn't. Because avoidance isn't healed by presence. It's only healed by choice, and they never made that choice. You saw the wounded child inside them and wanted to rescue it. You mistook your empathy for compatibility. You believed that by being different from everyone who hurt them before, they'd wake up and realize you were safe. But they didn't want safe. They wanted space. They didn't want to be seen. They wanted to be left alone. You were hoping for a breakthrough. They were just trying to keep things at arm's length. That inconsistency you kept rationalizing, that wasn't confusion. That was who they really were. That silence after an argument, that wasn't emotional overwhelm. That was emotional unavailability. The moments of affection you craved, those were just enough to keep you hanging on, but never enough to build anything real. And every time they gave you a crumb, you magnified it into a feast because you were starving for connection, and they were just offering survival. You weren't crazy. You weren't needy. You just wanted to be loved properly. And there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is mistaking sporadic affection for genuine love. Mistaking someone's emotional walls for emotional depth. The fantasy of who they could become kept you trapped in a cycle of hope and heartbreak. And the longer you stayed, the more you convinced yourself it was love, when in truth, it was just potential, and potential is not a promise. What your avoidant ex loved wasn't the connection, it was the control, the power, the emotional dominance. That quiet silence after an argument, that wasn't them needing space. It was a form of control. That unpredictability in their affection, that wasn't emotional complexity. It was manipulation, whether conscious or not. You were constantly walking on eggshells, trying to say the right thing, do the right thing, avoid triggering their withdrawal. And that constant anxiety, that wasn't love, that was emotional captivity.
They knew exactly what they were doing when they pulled away after a moment of closeness. They knew that you'd chase, that you'd overthink, that you'd replay everything in your mind, wondering what went wrong. And every time you reached out, apologized, or tried to reconnect, they got exactly what they wanted: control. Not love, not intimacy, not understanding, just control. The kind that puts them in the emotional driver's seat and you in the passenger seat, strapped in with guilt, fear, and longing. They didn't want mutual vulnerability. They wanted emotional distance, but on their terms. They wanted the upper hand. They wanted you to want them more than they wanted you. And the more you gave, the less they respected it. The more available you were, the more they pulled back. That power imbalance wasn't accidental, it was embedded in how they relate to people. It's how they protect themselves, because in their world, closeness equals danger, so control equals safety. You might have mistaken their detachment as a need for healing. You might have thought, they just don't know how to love. But there's a difference between someone who struggles with love and someone who weaponizes emotional distance to keep the power in their hands. You started adjusting your needs just to avoid losing them. You started suppressing your emotions, lowering your standards, accepting less and less just to keep the peace, just to feel close again, even if only for a moment. That's not love, that's emotional domination, and the longer you stayed, the more you lost touch with your own power, your own worth. You became addicted to the cycle, the silence, the pullback, the moment of reconnection, the false hope. That cycle is what they mastered, and you kept calling it love when it was actually just a power game in disguise. They weren't holding your heart, they were holding your attention, and that is a dangerous place to live. The hardest truth to swallow is that you didn't leave because you didn't love yourself enough to walk away. The reason you stayed in a relationship that drained you, that made you question your worth, was because you didn't yet realize your own value. You kept waiting for them to change, to choose you, to finally show you the love you deserved. But deep down, you knew, or at least, you felt that you were never going to get the kind of love that truly nourishes your soul. You were getting scraps, and you convinced yourself that those scraps were enough. And why? Because you weren't ready to choose yourself first. It wasn't because you were weak. It wasn't because you were too much or too emotional. It was because you hadn't yet recognized that you deserve someone who can meet you where you are. You thought their love was a reward, that their sporadic affection meant something more than it did. You convinced yourself that if you just kept holding on, just kept showing up, they'd eventually realize your worth. But that's not how love works. You can't keep proving your worth to someone who isn't capable of recognizing it. Your heart is a precious thing, and somewhere along the way, you started to believe that you had to earn someone's affection by accepting their emotional neglect. You started to accept their withdrawal as part of the deal, their silence as a form of love, their absence as an expression of their deep feelings for you, but that wasn't love. It was an emotional manipulation, a tactic to keep you hooked, uncertain, constantly second, guessing yourself. And in this game, the more you gave, the less they appreciated. The more you adjusted to their emotional unavailability, the further you drifted from your own needs. You stayed because you were afraid of the void they left behind. You feared loneliness more than self-respect. You feared the pain of walking away more than the pain of staying. But in staying, you only deepened the wound. Every time you let yourself be treated like an option, Every time you excused their behavior, you taught yourself that you weren't worthy of a love that's consistent, present, and healthy. You let someone define your worth by how they treated you, but that's not how love works. You should be the one defining your worth, not them. The painful reality is that you stayed in that unhealthy dynamic because you didn't fully believe that you could find better. You didn't believe that someone who truly respected you could exist outside of that toxic cycle. And the longer you stayed, the more you convinced yourself that this was all you deserved. But here's the truth: you deserve so much more. You deserve someone who looks at you and thinks, "I'm lucky to have you." Someone who doesn't pull away at the first sign of intimacy. Someone who cherishes your presence and values your emotional availability. You deserve to be loved with consistency, respect, and authenticity, and it starts with you learning to love yourself enough to walk away when someone isn't offering you that. Now that we've faced the painful truths, it's time to see the bigger picture. The truth you must internalize is this: you are not the problem. You are not too much, too emotional, or too demanding. You were simply in a relationship with someone who wasn't capable of loving you the way you deserved. The avoidant ex you've been mourning didn't fail you, they were just incapable of truly showing up. And for far too long, you've been trying to make sense of their confusion, their hot and cold behavior, their emotional unavailability. But the truth is simpler than that. They never had the capacity to love you in the way you needed. It wasn't about you, it was about them. Understand this: love isn't a game of chasing, of hoping for crumbs, or endlessly forgiving someone's emotional neglect. Love is about consistency, mutual respect, and connection. And you deserve that. You have always deserved someone who can show up and offer you love without the emotional gymnastics, without the endless guessing games, without the cycle of hurt and reconciliation. You've been giving your heart to someone who couldn't see it, and you've been bending over backward for someone who wasn't even capable of meeting you halfway. But now, you have the chance to reclaim that power and start valuing yourself as the incredible, worthy person you are. Your healing begins when you stop looking backward and start looking inward. The moment you stop defining your worth by someone who couldn't love you properly is the moment you step into your own strength. You've been operating on hope, on fantasy, on potential, but that's not real. Real love isn't about wondering if someone will change. It's about recognizing your worth and choosing a love that's reciprocal, consistent, and genuine. The love you give to others begins with the love you give to yourself. Stop settling for half love, stop accepting emotional neglect, and start demanding the full, undivided attention your heart deserves. Remember, the pain you feel right now is the pain of growth, not defeat. It's the pain of letting go of someone who couldn't give you the love you needed, and it's the pain of making space for the love that's waiting for you, the love that begins within you. You weren't just left by someone who couldn't love you. You were freed from a relationship that wasn't serving your highest good. Embrace this moment as your turning point. The real victory is not in them returning to your life. It's in your ability to rise above the hurt, recognize your worth, and walk forward into a future where you never settle for anything less than the love you truly deserve. This is the moment you choose yourself, and that is the most powerful decision you will ever make. Thank you so much for taking the time to engage with this content. I hope it resonated with you and empowered you to take the next step toward your personal growth and healing. You deserve the very best, and I believe you will find the strength to embrace that truth fully. Wishing you peace, clarity, and strength on your journey forward. If you ever need more guidance or a reminder of your worth, don't hesitate to reach out. Goodbye for now, and take care of yourself. You've got this.